I always thought I was different, that I would never be the kind of woman who strayed, who let herself fall into temptation. I had a good life, a stable marriage, a loving husband, a beautiful home. From the outside, I had everything anyone could ever want. So why did I risk it all? That's the question I still can't fully answer. It didn't start with a grand betrayal. There was no master plan, no deliberate choice to destroy everything I had built. It started small, too small for me to recognize it for what it was: a lingering glance, a laugh that lasted a little too long, a text message that didn't need to be sent but was sent anyway. And then there was him, Ethan. He wasn't the man I married. He wasn't better, smarter, or more successful than my husband. He wasn't even my type. But there was something about him, a spark, a thrill, something reckless that pulled me in before I even realized I had stepped too close. He worked in my office just a few doors down from mine. We had been nothing more than colleagues for years, friendly, professional, distant. But something changed. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me one day or the way his fingers brushed mine when he handed me a report. But suddenly he wasn't just a coworker anymore. And I wasn't just a married woman. The first real mistake came late one evening, long after most of the office had gone home. I had stayed behind to finish a report, and Ethan had done the same. It wasn't unusual. Overtime was a necessary evil in our line of work. But that night, something felt different. We ended up in the break room, standing too close, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. The office was dimly lit, the hum of the vending machines the only sound filling the empty space. I remember the way my pulse quickened when he laughed, the way his eyes lingered on mine as I sipped my coffee. I should have walked away then. I should have shut it down before it even started. But I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let the tension build, let myself enjoy the way he looked at me like I was something to be desired. It had been a long time since I had felt that way, too long. And then he touched me, just a light brush of his fingers against my wrist, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. "We should probably get back to work," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't move, probably. Neither of us did, not right away. I spent the next few days convincing myself that nothing had changed, that I was still the same person, that my marriage was still intact. I told myself that a little flirtation didn't mean anything, that I was just overthinking things. After all, what was the harm in an innocent conversation? What was wrong with enjoying someone's company? But the problem with lies is that they are easiest to believe when you tell them to yourself. The following week, Ethan and I were paired on a project. It was nothing major, just something to be wrapped up by the end of the quarter, but it meant spending more time together. Meetings that stretched into lunch breaks, strategy sessions that ran longer than they should have. I started looking forward to those moments more than I should have. And the worst part, so did he. I caught him watching me during presentations, his gaze lingering a second too long. He started bringing me coffee in the mornings, claiming he had picked up an extra by accident. He found excuses to stop by my office, leaning against my desk like he belonged there. One afternoon, after one of those endless meetings, we stood in the hallway, both of us hesitating as if neither of us wanted to be the first to walk away. "You know," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I really like working with you." I smiled, trying to ignore the way my stomach flipped. "We make a good team." He nodded, but his eyes held something deeper, something unspoken. "Yeah, we do." And just like that, another line had been crossed. I went home that night and looked at my husband across the dinner table, trying to remind myself of the life we had built together. Mark was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: reliable, kind, steady. But as I listened to him talk about his day, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere. My thoughts were wrapped around Ethan, his voice, his touch, the way he made me feel like something new and exciting instead of something predictable and known. That realization terrified me. I excused myself early, claiming I was tired, but sleep didn't come easy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few weeks, every decision that had led me to this point. I wanted to believe I was still in control, that I could stop this before it became something real. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had already started falling, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. I told myself it was nothing. A look, a touch, a conversation that lasted just a little too long. It didn't mean anything, that's what I whispered to myself over and over again. But deep down I knew I was lying. Because the way Ethan made me feel, that rush of excitement, that electric thrill, was something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't love, and it wasn't even desire. It was attention, and I had forgotten what that felt like. The days blurred together, and the space between my real life and the life I was starting to crave grew smaller. At home, I played my role. I kissed Mark goodbye in the mornings, asked about his meetings, laughed at his stories, and sat beside him on the couch as we watched our usual TV shows. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside I was unraveling. Ethan was a slow addiction, creeping into my mind at the most unexpected moments. A text from him would make my stomach flip. Seeing his name on my screen made my pulse race. A meeting on my calendar with his name beside mine felt like something I was secretly looking forward to, though I pretended it was nothing. I started dressing differently for work. Subtle changes, tighter skirts, softer lipstick, a little extra time spent on my hair. I told myself it was just self-care, that it had nothing to do with him, but I knew better. And I had a feeling he did too. The tension between us was a living thing, growing stronger with every interaction. It was the way his eyes would linger on me during meetings, just long enough to make my breath catch. The way his hand would brush against mine when he handed me a document, the slightest fleeting touch that sent sparks up my spine. The way his voice would drop just a little lower when we were alone, filling the air with something unspoken, something we both felt but neither of us acknowledged. Until we did. It happened on a Wednesday evening, long after most of the office had emptied. We had been working late on a project, both of us exhausted, the glow of our screens the only light in the room. "We should call it a night," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair, stretching his arms over his head. "It's almost 10. I glanced at the time and sighed. God, how did it get so late? He smirked. "Time flies when you're drowning in reports." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Or when you're just trying to avoid going home." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I regretted them instantly. His expression changed. "Is that what you're doing?" His voice was quiet, careful. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my pen. "I don't know." Silence stretched between us, heavy, loaded, and then, so subtly I almost missed it, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. The moment his skin met mine, my breath hitched. It was nothing, a simple touch, but it was also everything, because it was the first time we had crossed the line and we both knew it. I could have pulled away, I should have. But I didn't. After that night, nothing was the same. I started looking for him more often, catching myself searching for his face in crowded hallways, waiting for the buzz of my phone with a message from him. And every time I saw him, it felt like we were playing a dangerous game, one that neither of us wanted to stop. The next time we were alone, I was the one who touched him first. A simple brush of my fingers against his wrist as I reached for my coffee, a meaningless, fleeting touch. But the way he looked at me afterward, it was the same way I had been looking at him, like this was already inevitable. Like we both knew exactly where this was going, and neither of us wanted to stop it. By the time I realized how far I had fallen, it was already too late. I told myself that as long as we never actually did anything, it wasn't real, that it was just tension, just unspoken thoughts neither of us would ever act on. But that was a lie, because in my heart I had already crossed the line, and I think he had too. I could see it in the way Ethan looked at me now, less guarded, more intentional. In the way he found excuses to be near me, how his fingers would brush against mine when he handed me a document, how he would linger a second too long when we said goodbye for the night. It wasn't innocent anymore. But the real moment, the one I could never take back, came in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Friday evening and the office had emptied out hours ago. I had stayed late to finish up a report, and I wasn't surprised when Ethan knocked lightly on my office door, a takeout bag in his hand. "Figured you didn't eat," he said with a smirk. I was right, was I? I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You're not wrong." He set the bag down on my desk and took a seat across from me. The room felt too quiet, the air between us charged. We ate, talking about nothing important, and yet everything about it felt different, more significant. I told myself to leave when we finished eating, to go home to Mark, to pretend this night had never happened. But then Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbow on my desk, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface. "Rachel," he said softly, like my name was something he had been holding onto for too long. My breath hitched. "Yeah." He didn't speak right away, he just looked at me, really looked at me, and in that moment I knew there was no turning back, and then he reached for me. The first kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, a question and an answer all at once. His lips barely grazed mine at first, as if giving me time to stop it, to pull away. But I couldn't. The moment I kissed him back, something inside me shattered. It was like I had been holding my breath for months, and now, finally, I was exhaling. I felt his hand slide to the back of my neck, his fingers threading into my hair. He pulled me closer, deepening the kiss, his body pressing against mine until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I should have stopped, I should have pulled away, but instead I let it happen. And in that moment, nothing else existed, not Mark, not my marriage, not the years I had spent building a life that, until now, had felt secure. There was only this, only him. We didn't go further that night, maybe because we both knew how dangerous it was, maybe because we were still clinging to the illusion that we could control this, that it was just one kiss, but it wasn't just one kiss, because after that night I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I didn't want to. I wish I could say I felt guilt right away, that after the kiss I drove home drowning in regret, that I looked Mark in the eye and felt shame burning through me, but that would be a lie. The truth, I felt alive. It was like something inside me had been reawakened. For months, maybe years, I had felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life, and now suddenly I was awake. Every nerve in my body was on edge, every sensation heightened. I had spent so long convincing myself that nothing was wrong with my marriage, that I was happy, that the boredom creeping in was normal. But in Ethan's arms, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: desire, and I didn't want to let it go. The next morning, Mark kissed me before leaving for work like he always did. "See you tonight?" he asked, and I nodded, smiling as if everything was normal, as if I hadn't kissed another man less than 12 hours ago. "Of course," I said. He smiled, completely unaware, completely trusting, and for the first time something did twist in my chest. Guilt maybe, but not enough to stop me. Because all I could think about was seeing Ethan again. We didn't talk about it for a few days. In the office, things carried on like usual: meetings, reports, coffee breaks, but something had shifted. I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. When we passed in the hallway, our hands would brush and neither of us would move away. The tension was undeniable, undeniably intoxicating. Then one evening I got a message. "Ethan, come by my place just to talk." My heart pounded as I stared at my phone. I knew what "just to talk" really meant, and I knew I should have said no. Instead I typed, "Okay." The second I stepped inside his apartment, I knew I had already made my choice. Ethan stood there, watching me, waiting. I could feel the tension crackling between us, thick, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. He didn't reach for me right away, he let me come to him, and I did. When I kissed him this time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. It was desperate, consuming. His hands slid down my back, pulling me against him, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like a wife. I felt like a woman who was wanted. And I wanted more. After that night, there was no pretending. I was living two lives now, one where I was the perfect wife, making dinner, folding laundry, smiling at Mark like nothing had changed. And another where I was Ethan's lover, sneaking away for stolen moments, feeling his hands on my skin, whispering his name into the darkness. I knew it couldn't last forever. I knew we were walking on a wire that could snap at any moment, but that didn't stop me. I didn't want it to stop. Because the thrill of it, the sheer danger, was part of what made it impossible to resist, and I wasn't ready to give it up, not yet. Living two lives was exhausting. At first, it had felt exhilarating, like I was part of some grand secret, a thrilling deception that only Ethan and I shared. But as the days stretched into weeks, the weight of it all started pressing down on me. Every glance over my shoulder, every moment I spent crafting the perfect lie, it was all becoming too much. Mark started to notice. "You've been distracted lately," he said one evening as we ate dinner. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, stirring my food even though I had no appetite. "Yeah, just work stress." He studied me for a moment, his fork pausing midair. "You sure?" I nodded quickly, too quickly. "Of course." But I could feel it, his growing suspicion, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep the truth from him. Ethan, on the other hand, was getting impatient. "We can't keep sneaking around like this forever," he said one night as I lay tangled in the sheets beside him. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "You knew what this was." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Did I? Because I think I want more." The words sent a ripple of panic through me. More, I hadn't let myself think about the future, about what would happen when the secrecy faded and reality set in. Did I really want to throw everything away for this? "Ethan," I started, but he shook his head, cutting me off. "You have to make a choice, Rachel. You can't keep living in between." His words echoed in my mind long after I left his apartment that night. Things at home felt different. Mark watched me closer. He didn't say anything outright, but I could feel the change in his energy. He lingered when I was on my phone, his questions about my day becoming a little too specific. And then one night, he said something that made my stomach drop. "I saw Ethan today." I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Oh," Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah, he seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder like he was worried about something." I forced a laugh, hoping he couldn't hear the panic in my voice. "That's weird." He didn't laugh. "Is there something I should know, Rachel?" The air between us felt thick, suffocating. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time since this started, I realized I was about to get caught. The walls were closing in. I could feel it in Mark's eyes whenever he looked at me, in the way his questions had become more pointed, his patience wearing thinner. And I could feel it in Ethan too, his frustration growing, his words sharper, his desire for more turning into an unspoken demand. I had spent so long trying to balance both lives, convincing myself that I could keep everything separate, that I could be Mark's wife and Ethan's lover, living in two worlds that would never collide, but I had been wrong. And now the collision was inevitable. The night it all fell apart, I came home late. Mark was waiting for me in the kitchen, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. I could tell he wasn't going to let me slip away with another excuse this time. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice level controlled. I hesitated for half a second too long. "At work." He nodded slowly, like he was processing the lie in real time. "Funny," he said, "I called your office, you weren't there." My stomach dropped, he knew. "Mark, I don't," he interrupted, his voice suddenly louder, sharper. "Don't lie to me again, Rachel, just tell me the truth." The truth. The word felt foreign, impossible. For months, I had buried it under layers of deception, covering it with half-truths and careful omissions. And now there was nothing left to hide behind. I took a breath, my hands trembling at my sides. I made a mistake. His laugh was cold, humorless. "A mistake?" He shook his head. "How long?" I swallowed hard. "A few months." The silence that followed was unbearable. I watched as my husband, the man who had trusted me, loved me, built a life with me, processed my betrayal in real time. And then something in his expression shifted. Was it worth it? His voice was quieter now, but somehow even more devastating. "Did he make you happy?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because I didn't have an answer, or maybe I did and I was just too much of a coward to say it. That night, Mark slept on the couch. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his restless movements downstairs. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the silence felt like a countdown to the inevitable. The next morning, I woke up to find him packing a bag. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice hoarse from a night without sleep. He didn't look at me. "Leaving, I need space." I felt the sting of tears, but I didn't try to stop him. What was there to say? I had already broken him. I had already destroyed us. He paused at the door, his back to me. "I'll be in touch, but don't wait for me, Rachel. I don't think I can fix this." And then he was gone. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I didn't go to work. I didn't call Ethan. I just sat in the silence of my empty house trying to make sense of what I had done. I had wanted excitement, passion, something more than the routine I had settled into. I had convinced myself that Ethan was the answer, that he made me feel alive in a way Mark never had. But now, sitting in the wreckage of my choices, I wasn't sure if I had ever really wanted him at all. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Ethan's name. But instead of texting him, I set it down. Because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure I wanted him anymore. The silence in the house was unbearable. For years, I had shared this space with Mark, our laughter, our conversations, our routines filling every corner. Now all that remained was the echo of his absence. The unmade bed where he used to sleep, the empty seat at the dinner table, the lingering scent of his cologne on a jacket he had forgotten in the closet. I had got what I wanted, hadn't I? Freedom. Then why did it feel like I had lost everything? Ethan called the next day. I let it ring. Then he texted, "Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. Was I? I could have gone to him. He would have welcomed me with open arms. He would have told me everything was going to be okay, that we could be together now. But that was the problem. I didn't want comfort, I wanted clarity. And for the first time, I realized that Ethan wasn't the answer. He never was. Days passed, then a week. Mark didn't call and I didn't reach out. I didn't know if it was pride or guilt that kept me from dialing his number, maybe both. I went to work pretending everything was fine, but the weight of my choices followed me everywhere. The whispers in the office, the looks people gave me, they knew, maybe not the details, but enough to see the cracks, enough to know that something had changed. And Ethan, he had changed too. We still saw each other in meetings, still exchanged professional pleasantries, but the spark that had once drawn us together was gone, replaced by something colder. He wanted me to choose him, and I had. Just not in the way he expected. One evening, I found myself driving aimlessly, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I didn't know where I was going until I pulled up outside a familiar apartment building. Mark's. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the door, wondering if I had the right to knock, wondering if he would even answer. Finally, I stepped out of the car, one step at a time. I knocked, my hands were shaking. When the door opened, Mark stood there, looking at me like I was someone he used to know. I opened my mouth, but my voice caught in my throat. He exhaled slowly. "Why are you here, Rachel?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know." He nodded as if that answer didn't surprise him. "Are you looking for forgiveness?" I bit my lip. Would it matter if I was? A long silence stretched between us. Then finally he said, "I don't hate you, but I can't love you anymore." The words hit harder than I expected. I had ruined the best thing in my life for a thrill that no longer mattered. I had burned my world down, and now I was standing in the ashes, realizing too late that there was nothing left to save. Mark sighed. "I hope you figure out what you're looking for, but it's not me, not anymore." Tears blurred my vision. I nodded, stepping back. "Goodbye, Mark." And then I walked away. I didn't go to Ethan. I didn't try to fix things with Mark. I went home to my empty house and sat in the quiet, facing the truth I had spent so long running from. I wasn't in love with Ethan. I wasn't even sure I had ever stopped loving Mark. What I had been chasing wasn't passion, it was escape. And now I was truly, finally alone.
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.